They're part of the big lie. The big lie. I was being reminded by a friend of mine, and maybe you were with me, I can't recall, when we were told that, Goebbels in the great lie, you keep repeating the lie, repeating the lie. Well, there was a print that when Dresden was bombed, firebombed, there were 250 people that were killed, or was it 2,500 people were killed? And Goebbels said, no, 25,000 or 250,000 were killed. And our papers printed that. Our papers printed it. It's the big lie. People will know it's one thing for one man, one woman, to repeat the lie over and over and over again. By the way, Trump said that before he ran. If you say it enough, I'm going to convince you. I'll say it enough. The press is bad, the press is bad, the press is bad, the press is bad. If he's the only one saying it, that's one thing. But the acolytes that follow him, like Cruz and others, they are as responsible as he is. And so it's not about whether or not they get impeached. It's about whether or not they can continue to hold power because of the disgust the American people have for their actions. There are decent people out there who actually believe these lies because they've heard it again and again. I was with a friend of mine who's a medical doctor telling me that his neighbor said to him, he lived in another state, his neighbor's a good person, said, but Doc, this is true. There's a lot of chicanery that went on in this election. He said, tell me what? Well, I just know there was. They say it is. They say it is. This is a human condition. You say it and say it and say it and say it. The degree to which it becomes corrosive is in direct proportion to the number of people who say it. And so it's interesting to me, and I was pleased to hear some of the more prominent Republicans say to me that Ted Cruz's of the world are as responsible in terms of people believing the lies as, not as responsible, but similarly responsible like Trump. They're part of the big lie.
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though.
CNN reported on Friday that U.S. authorities are seeing if those emails we just talked about are connected to an ongoing Russian disinformation effort.
The information found on the laptop may be part of a Russian disinformation campaign.
Foreign intelligence operation.
For all we know, these emails are made up.
A Russian disinformation effort.
Described by many intelligence experts as having hallmarks.
All the hallmarks
of a Russian
disinformation.
Russian disinformation
campaign.
This is a classic example of the right-wing media.
Assets as a conduit to feed misinformation to the President of the United States.
When you look at this computer store owner in Delaware who allegedly received Hunter Biden's laptop, that is more in line with when you think about somebody who's a useful idiot. That's kind of the entry point that is kind of, a classic indicator of the potential presence of disinformation.
Right-wing media has been focused on Hunter Biden, this laptop that intelligence officials have warned is likely Russian disinformation.
Law enforcement is actively investigating whether the alleged Hunter Biden emails are linked to any foreign intel ops.
The story is preposterous. So we're supposed to believe that Hunter Biden, in a drunken stupor, dropped off his laptop in, I guess, apparently QAnon repair office.
Super spreader events and giving Russian disinformation, spreading Russian disinformation.
Disinformation that he knows to be fabricated and supplied by a foreign intel. Despite the warning, he's still doing it.
You have said this entire thing is so obviously a Russian plot.
It's sort of a crazy quilt at this point, which has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Rudy basically functioning as a Russian asset by pushing Russian disinformation.
CNN reported on Friday that U.S. authorities are seeing if those emails we just talked about are connected to an ongoing Russian disinformation effort. The Post claimed that the emails were found on a laptop computer that was brought to a repair shop. There's a lie about the story that does not add up. For all we know, these emails are made up, or maybe some are real and others are fakes. We don't know. But we do know that this is a classic example of the right-wing media machine.
Secretary, who's Nina Jankowicz? She is the executive director of the Disinformation Governance. And is this the same individual who said the dossier was real and the Hunter Biden laptop story was false? Is that the individual who's now running the Disinformation Governance Board? I'm not familiar with those statements. Been reported widely.
Russian intelligence. This walks like Russian intelligence. This talks like Russian intelligence. This effort by Rudy Giuliani and the New York Post and Steve Bannon to cook up supposed dirt on Joe Biden looks like a classic Russian playbook disinformation campaign.
Ooh, you lied, Jeremy Bash. You lied. You knew it was a lie when you said it. There was zero evidence of that. And you and a bunch of other creeps in the intel community, having spent decades trying to subvert foreign elections, tried to subvert ours. And it looks like you did.
Do you believe the recent leak of material allegedly from Hunter's computer is part of a Russian disinformation campaign?
Giuliani was being fed disinformation from the Russians. And we also know that Putin is trying very hard to spread disinformation about Joe Biden. And so when you put the combination of Russia, Giuliani, the president together, it's just what it is. It's a smear campaign. My son has not made money in terms of this thing about, what are you talking about, China?
On May 13th, 2017, I received an email concerning allocation of equity, which says 10% held by H for the big guy. In that email, there's no question that H stands for Hunter, big guy for his father? Joe Biden. Hunter often referred to his father as the big guy or my chairman.
Totally discredited. And by the way,
Well, wait, he didn't get $3.5 million, Joe?
Mr. Vice
He got $3.5 million.
It is not true. My
Joe.
son did nothing wrong at Burisma.
I think he did.
Mr. President,
let
him answer.
He doesn't want to let me answer because he knows I have the truth. His position has been totally, thoroughly discredited.
By who? The media.
Incriminating evidence allegedly found on a laptop belonging to Biden.
Some sort of Russian disinformation campaign effort.
It's a lie. This lacks credibility. The fact that it appeared in the New York Post,
The only place low enough to put this orphan bastard story in print.
Obvious disinformation.
It is so obviously a Russian operation.
so obviously disinformation.
So obviously a Russian plot. Tell me why it's so obviously a Russian plot to you.
This is just classic textbook Soviet-Russian tradecraft at work.
Right, exactly. And this is classic, very classic Russian disinformation tactic.
Your classic disinformation campaign.
This is classic Trump.
You shouldn't look at it as anything other than a Russian disinformation operation.
Known Kremlin disinformation.
Russians would be my number one guess.
Obviously, Russia.
Russian disinformation operation.
Russian disinformation.
Pushing Russian disinformation.
It does bear the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo.
Hunter Biden's laptop looks like it's tied to Vladimir Putin in Moscow.
Are you missing a laptop?
Not that I know of.
What?
This whole operation looks right out of the Kremlin playbook.
The playbook of Russian disinformation.
Russian disinformation put into the haystack.
Russian disinfo.
Sounds like bullshit. I mean, who takes a laptop with their most personal information, drops it off, and never comes back for it?
He is the smartest man I know. Russian plan.
Russian disinformation.
Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
The Russian disinformation campaign.
Putin is trying very hard to spread disinformation about Joe Biden.
So it could have been yours.
Of course, certainly. History will expose you all as fools and useful idiots for the Russians.
50 former intelligence officials signed on to a letter yesterday saying that the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's emails has all of the classic earmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign.
Don't trust anything that he's telling you. This is Russian disinformation.
Russian disinformation meant to harm our democracy.
Altered or fake, unverified emails.
The story did not quite land due to the lack of verification.
Listen,
verified.
what can't be verified?
The laptop.
Why you say that?
Well, because it can't be verified.
I don't even want to report this. This is one of the most powerful families in Washington.
Liz, I'm a journalist.
Okay, I would love if you guys would start doing that verification.
No, we're not going to do your work for you.
It's a journalist's
Contrary.
job.
Experts say the emails cannot be authenticated.
Not really stories, just pure distractions. No serious journalist should fall for it.
It's a journalist's
Contrary to
job
what
to find out if this is verified.
Bottom line, mainstream media is not reporting on this story because we can't authenticate this material.
Biden emails finally authenticated according to the New York Times. The Hunter Biden laptop material is genuine.
Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. The New York Times has authenticated emails that appear to have come from a laptop abandoned by Hunter Biden in Delaware. The president previously said that the New York Post story about this was a bunch of garbage and that it was a Russian plant. Does he stand by that assessment?
I pointed to the Department of Justice and also to Hunter Biden's representatives. He doesn't work in the government.
You all see us and hear us? Perfect. Jay, you're beginning to convince the American people there is a thing called climate crisis. About time.
Indeed.
So just for old time's sake, let's look back at how the compliant media treated this story when it first came out. First, CNN. How the newest anti-Biden narrative was manufactured. Why haven't you seen any stories from NPR about the New York Post Hunter Biden story? Well, we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. Ignore that story and focus instead on a legally blind transgendered pony who makes a living doing porn. Pretty good stuff, by the way. Here's MSNBC. Why does Rudy Giuliani have access to peddle this disinformation repeatedly? This is not censorship. Facebook is under no obligation to allow a disputed report that appears to contain disinformation. Android retweets. Good for Joe Biden. No need to dignify a Russian hatchet job. We're not doing emails again, America. Look at all these jackasses. David Frum, Max Boot, David Korn, Ben Rhodes, Tommy Vietor. Remember Evan McMullen? He doesn't. The list of dolts goes on and on.
Foreign interference in our elections. Of course, the irony is the laptop showed that foreign companies and governments had been paying the Biden family in exchange for changing U.S. policy toward those countries, selling out our nation for cash.
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same things that are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
I didn't trust the FBI enough to make a copy of the drive and just put it off-site. That way, if I disappeared, if the FBI threw me in a hole somewhere, then my friend would hand-deliver this drive to Rudy Giuliani. The reason why Rudy Giuliani is because during the summer of 2019, he was in the Ukraine researching exactly what I was sitting on. I chose Rudy as to be my safety net. Should something happen to me, my friend would reach out with a copy of the drive.